Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. For Duggar family latest news update, please subscribe the channel and press the bell icon. Jessa Duggar's 7th pregnancy had always been a quiet journey, kept mostly away from the public eye after years of intense scrutiny, online criticism, and emotional scars from her previous losses. For months, she appeared calm and steady on the surface, sharing only glimpses, small smiles and family photos, short clips of children doing crafts, and vague captions about grace and God's timing. But behind that controlled exterior, the truth was far more complicated. The Duggar home had been filled with tension, whispers, and long nights of silent prayers as Jessa battled an unspoken fear that something was not right with this pregnancy. And today, everything collapsed. What was supposed to be a routine checkup turned into the most devastating day of her life, sending shockwaves through the entire Duggar family and shattering the quiet peace she had tried so hard to maintain. It started early in the morning when Ben noticed Jessa moving unusually slow, her face pale, her breath short, her hands trembling as she tried to finish breakfast for the kids. She brushed off his concern at first, insisting she was only tired, that pregnancy was simply taking its toll. But as she tried to stand from the table, pain shot through her body so sharply that she gasped and gripped the back of the chair to steady herself. Ben immediately knelt beside her, panic rising in his eyes. He begged her to let him drive her to the hospital. Jessa hesitated, fearing the worst, but not wanting to face it. She whispered, "Maybe it's nothing, maybe it's just another cramp." But the pain intensified, and by the time she made it to the hallway, she collapsed into Ben's arms. He carried her to the car as the children stood frozen, watching their mother's face contort in agony, not understanding the gravity of what they were witnessing. The drive to the hospital felt endless, even though Ben sped down the familiar roads with shaking hands gripping the steering wheel. Jessa remained eerily quiet, her eyes fixed out the window, her lips moving in silent prayer. When they finally arrived, nurses rushed her inside, their expressions shifting the moment they began the initial checks. Something was wrong, very wrong. Ben could see it in the tightening of jaws, in the hushed conversations, in the way one nurse hurriedly signaled a doctor to come over. Jessa was wheeled away, and Ben stood alone in the hallway, numb and terrified. The doctor returned after only a few minutes, but the expression on his face made Ben's stomach drop. He explained that they could not detect a heartbeat. The room spun as Ben tried to absorb the words. Another loss, another heartbreak, Jessa's 7th baby gone. When they broke the news to Jessa, she didn't scream or cry at first. She stared at the ceiling in complete silence, her eyes glassy and distant, as if her mind had suddenly retreated far away from the pain. It wasn't until she saw Ben's trembling hand reach for hers that the dam finally broke. She collapsed into sobs so raw and guttural that the nurse beside her looked away, unable to hide her own tears. Jessa kept repeating, "Not again, please, not again," as Ben held her. The memories of her previous miscarriage came flooding back, resurrecting the trauma she had fought so fiercely to bury. But this pain felt sharper, deeper, almost unbearable. She had carried this baby for months. She had felt movement. She had pictured holding them, dressing them, preparing a place beside their siblings. And now the dream was gone. The hospital room fell into a stillness filled only with Jessa's quiet crying. Doctors explained the medical options, but she barely heard them. Her mind was spiraling, wondering if she had done something wrong, if she could have prevented this, if she had missed a warning sign. Mothers often blame themselves, even when the truth is far more complex. Ben assured her none of this was her fault, but even his voice sounded faint, like it was coming from somewhere far away. Her body was weak, her emotions shattered, and her heart felt like it had been ripped from her chest. The doctors prepared her for the procedure, but before they took her back, she wanted a moment alone with Ben. She whispered to him that she felt responsible, that maybe God was punishing her, that maybe she wasn't meant to be the mother of a large family despite the pressure everyone expected her to embrace. Ben refused to let her sink into despair. He kissed her forehead and said, "You are the strongest woman I know. This is not your fault. We will get through this together." As Jessa was taken into the operating room, the scene outside the hospital was growing chaotic. News had already leaked. Someone at the hospital had tipped off a local blogger who had connections to Duggar watchers online. Within minutes, social media exploded with rumors. Some claimed Jessa was in critical condition. Others whispered that she had lost the baby weeks ago and had been hiding it. Some cruel commenters mocked her, blaming her family's beliefs, pregnancy decisions, and lifestyle. But among the noise were thousands of messages of support, prayers, and heartbreaking empathy from mothers who had endured the same tragic loss. The Duggar name often trended for drama, but today the tone was different. This was grief, raw and human. Back at the Duggar compound, chaos erupted as Jim Bob received the call from Ben. Jim Bob's voice cracked as he yelled for Michelle to come quickly. Michelle froze mid-step, her hand over her chest as Ben's trembling voice on speakerphone repeated the words none of them wanted to hear. "There's no heartbeat, we lost the baby. Jessa is in the operating room." Michelle burst into tears, remembering her own pregnancy losses, feeling instantly connected to Jessa's pain. She rushed to gather essentials and headed straight for the hospital with Jim Bob. The household buzzed with urgency as siblings cried, prayed, and tried to comfort each other. By the time the parents arrived, the hallway outside Jessa's room was filled with Duggar siblings. Jana stood quietly in the corner, holding a small bag of comfort items she had packed for Jessa. Soft socks, a Bible, tissues. Joanna cried openly, remembering her own late-term loss and how the world had seemed to collapse around her during that time. Jill, despite the distant relationship she had with the family in recent years, rushed over too. She didn't speak much, but she placed a gentle hand on Ben's shoulder, offering silent support. Even Jinger called from Los Angeles, her voice breaking as she begged for updates. The fractured points of the family seemed to dissolve under the weight of shared grief. When Jessa was finally brought back to her room, she looked fragile, her eyes swollen, her face pale, her body weak. Ben sat beside her, holding her hand tightly. Michelle entered slowly and immediately broke down upon seeing her daughter. She knelt beside the bed, hugging Jessa gently, whispering prayers and words of love. Jessa sobbed into her mother's shoulder, whispering, "Why does this keep happening to me?" Why this baby Michelle could only hold her tears dripping onto her daughter's gown. Jim Bob stood at the foot of the bed, his eyes red and swollen. He placed a hand on Jessa's foot, squeezing gently. His emotions were heavy. He felt guilt, knowing the expectations he had placed on his daughters to welcome many children. But in this moment, he wasn't a strict patriarch or a figure of television fame. He was just a father watching his daughter break apart. He apologized softly, though Jessa wasn't sure for what. Maybe for the pressure, maybe for the pain, maybe for simply not being able to protect her. Hours passed as the family remained gathered, comforting Jessa, comforting each other, trying to come to terms with the loss. Ben kept replaying the morning in his head, wondering if he should have rushed her to the hospital sooner, if he should have insisted earlier, if he had missed any signs. The guilt weighed heavily on him. When Jessa noticed, she squeezed his hand and said, "This is not your fault. Please don't carry this." But he did, and he would for a long time. Meanwhile, the news cycle outside grew louder. Online communities mourned deeply, especially mothers who understood the emotional devastation of pregnancy loss. But some corners of the internet turned cruel, accusing the Duggars of using the tragedy for attention or speculating wildly about Jessa's health. Ben made the decision to have the hospital restrict visitors and block media inquiries. He wanted the next few days to belong to Jessa, to their family, to their grief, not to the public. Late in the evening, a doctor came in with more detailed information. They believed the baby had passed recently, possibly within the last 24 to 48 hours. But the exact cause remained unclear. Jessa's blood pressure had been dangerously low, and her body was showing signs of distress. Had she waited any longer, her own life might have been at serious risk. The realization hit everyone hard. Not only had they lost the baby, they could have lost Jessa too. That night, as the lights dimmed in the hospital room, Jessa lay awake, unable to close her eyes without seeing flashes of the moment she heard the words, "no heartbeat." She thought about the baby, about the tiny life that had slipped away silently. She wondered if it was a boy or a girl. She imagined holding them, whispering goodbye, giving them a name. Ben climbed into the narrow hospital bed beside her, wrapping his arms around her as she cried into his chest. It was the first time all day she had allowed herself to fully break, and Ben held her tighter, whispering, "We'll get through this. I promise." Back home, her children were confused and anxious. Spurgeon asked when Mommy was coming home. Ivy asked if the baby was okay. Henry asked why everyone was crying. They were too young to understand the depth of the tragedy, but they felt the heaviness in the air. Ben's parents had arrived to help take care of them, trying to keep the home steady while Ben focused on Jessa. But the house felt strangely quiet without her laughter, her footsteps, her steady presence. The next morning, Jessa requested a moment alone with Ben and her parents. The family stepped out while she gathered the strength to speak. She looked at her husband and said, "I don't know if I can do this again. The fear, the loss, it's breaking me." Ben took her hand gently and told her she didn't have to make any decisions right now. But her words hung heavy in the air. For the first time, Jessa Duggar, who had once embraced motherhood with open arms, was considering stepping away from having more children, and no one could blame her. When the rest of the family returned, Jessa mustered a small, fragile smile, though her eyes remained hollow. Michelle suggested naming the baby, giving them identity and honor. Jessa nodded weakly. She whispered a name, and though the story doesn't reveal it publicly, the family accepted it with tears. A chaplain visited shortly after and prayed over the family, offering words of healing and comfort. By afternoon, Jessa's story had spread across every major entertainment outlet. Some Duggar siblings posted subtle messages of heartbreak without details, while others remained silent, not wanting to intrude. Fans flooded social media with condolences. The news trended globally, yet inside that small hospital room, the world felt quiet and unbearably heavy. As night approached again, Jessa stared at the ceiling, thinking about her baby, her body, her future, her faith. She felt angry at herself for feeling angry at God. Grief is complicated like that, full of conflicting emotions, sacred questions, and wounds that do not heal quickly. She wondered how long it would take before she could breathe normally again without feeling like her lungs were collapsing. She wondered how she would explain everything to her children. She wondered how she would get out of bed tomorrow. Ben remained by her side, holding her hand even when she slept. The sound of her soft breathing was a reminder that she was still here, still alive, still fighting. And that alone gave him a sliver of hope. For now, the Duggar family could only remain close, supporting Jessa in the darkest chapter of her life, knowing that grief like this does not disappear. It becomes part of the story, part of the scar, part of the testimony. And as the world watched from afar, one thing became clear. Behind the headlines, behind the fame, behind the controversy, there was a mother whose heart had been shattered into 1,000 pieces. And tonight, in that hospital room, surrounded by silence and sorrow, Jessa Duggar held onto the fragile hope that someday, though not today, not tomorrow, light might find its way back into the cracks of her broken heart.